Welcome back. You've just tuned into Women's AM this morning. I am joined by Sister Maliha, Sister Maria, and we also have our special guest this morning joining us via Skype, Zakia. Assalamu alaikum, Zakia.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you, sister?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, we're very well, and we're very happy for you to be joining us this morning. And I understand that you are an author. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've written about? Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, Wa alaikum assalam.
Sorry,
yes,
Sister Zakia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, so I have 8 books, and most of my writing you can find at uzauthor.com. And my books basically deal with real-life struggles, whether it's health or spiritual struggles, different things that are happening in people's lives, mostly dealing with Muslims and their struggles in the West, trying to hold on to their faith, dealing with relationship problems, family struggles, these sorts of things.
MashaAllah. And what have the responses been to your books?
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, they've been very, very positive. We have people who have become Muslim after reading some of the books, some people who have come back to Islam after reading the books. Some of the books are used in colleges and universities and high schools, both in the secular and the religious realm. So we've gotten a lot of positive react.
MashaAllah, that's really beautiful. We hope to, inshallah, benefit from some of the wisdom that you hold for us on today's topic, inshallah.
MashaAllah, inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, without further ado, let's get on with the discussion on today's Her Views, where we discuss palliative care. If you've been told that your child may not get better, you might also have heard about palliative care. Everyone facing life-threatening illness will need some degree of supportive care in addition to treatments such as cancer. So what can palliative care do for us? Remember, as always, this is a live discussion, so please do share your comments and questions on this topic. The number to call is on your screens now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #WAM15. So, Zakia, I'm going to come to you first. When we talk about palliative care, what does this actually mean, and who would provide these services?
This is a multidisciplinary approach to basically treating I would say it wouldn't be curing, it would be looking at more so making a comfortable situation for a person who's suffering from a very difficult illness. And usually it's connected to something that cannot be cured, at least by human knowledge. And you would bring in everything from physicians to psychologists to chaplains to mental health workers, anything that will make that person's struggle a little bit more comfortable as they're going through this very difficult illness that we don't necessarily have a cure for at that time.
SubhanAllah, it's really striking to hear the different types of professionals that are involved in making sure that the patient gets the required help. But when we look at what we've got available here in the UK, what can we say are supportive agencies that we can actually look towards?
Well, we have hospices, hospitals in this country, and the hospices are mainly run by charities, inshallah. So, and that's who provide the care. And as Zakia said, in terms of psychological, spiritual, and emotional needs, they're all taken care of for the child and the family.
I mean, we've got, mashallah, when we say, for example, when we look at cancer, for example, whatever cancer it may be, we've got networks such as Macmillan Cancer who are there to actually help people who are suffering from cancer, but not just the patient themselves, but actually the families or the friends who are helping them get through this difficult time. They are there to actually give support to them. So, mashallah, getting them to come to meetings to discuss the feelings and emotions as they're going through, and also looking at some of the some other services that they can access as well. I mean, mashallah. So when we look at, especially when we're talking about young children who may be unable to articulate their symptoms, what are the main areas of management for them, Sister Maria?
The assessment is undertaken by your local health authority, and they are the initial assessors of the needs for the particular child. And what they do is they offer a holistic assessment. So, as you gave the example of somebody suffering with cancer, they would usually be referred to a charity or a hospice that deals within that, that's their speciality. In terms of other diseases that the child may have, it may be congenital issues or conditions such as a heart condition or any type of birth defect, or even actually an accident that leads to an injury. So then the child requires treatment, a holistic palliative care treatment. So inshallah, once these have been assessed, once the child has initially been assessed in stage 1, it then goes on to it moves on to assessing that child's needs for that particular disease or ailment, and then a bespoke package is made.
I mean, if we look at, the method and the assessment that's used in admitting palliative care for patients, how are these symptoms managed, Sister Maniha?
Well, really depends very much on the illness and the overall prognosis. Doctors and care workers would look at the mobility issues of the patient. They would look at the psychological state and the age of the patient. They would also take into account any pain levels and how the actual illness or body is actually being affected. As well as that, I think they need to see overall the context in which the parents how they can care for the children, how much extra help would be involved. Sometimes if parents are working, there's a need to have outside carers come into the house or perhaps into the hospice or to the hospital. So it really depends, and like Mari was describing, a bespoke package, it really needs to entail, lots and lots of areas of thought.
Because of course every illness is different and everyone suffering with the illness would react differently, so obviously they would have to tailor it to the needs of the individual and their families. So it's something that we can say is holistic in that sense. And we do have a caller on the line. We have Sister Ruxana. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Ruxana. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Can you hear me, sisters?
Yes, alhamdulillah, we can hear you.
I just wanted to come on air and just talk about my daughter. I have a 7-year-old daughter by the name of Jasmine. And in April of this year, sadly, she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour. She followed a course of radiotherapy, which finished in June. And alhamdulillah, she's doing really well. She's a very strong girl.
Alhamdulillah.
The doctors can't really do anything else but the radiotherapy, which doesn't take the tumour away. It just tries to shrink it. What we're actually going to do, inshallah, on Thursday, is take her to Umrah.
Inshallah.
Pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, because there is a cure for every disease. I mean, the doctors have said there isn't anything else at the moment. It affects children primarily, but Allah has said there is a cure for every disease. We just may not know it. So we're going to take her to Umrah and inshallah pray for her there. And
inshallah. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, Sister Ruxana, for sharing that with us. Can you tell us a little bit about what's helping you to get through this difficult time? As I can imagine, it is a very difficult time. What's helped you to cope?
It's the dua.
Dua. Yeah, abundantly making dua. Jazakumullah khair.
The school have prayed for her, even on Islam channel. Alhamdulillah, I managed to speak to one of the brothers when he was in Mecca during Hajj, and he prayed for her and asked the Ummah to do the same. To be honest, really, it's our faith, the prayers of everybody that learns about her situation, and that's what's keeping us going. And most predominantly want to take this trip, inshallah, and I pray.
Please hold.
I think we lost Sister Ruxana. Inshallah, we pray that Allah gives her shifa and that all your du'as are answered when you go to Umrah, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, Sister, for calling us and sharing with us your story, and obviously it is a very difficult time. And Zaki, if I can just bring you back in, did you hear Sister Ruxana?
I did, and I pray that her child is healed, and I would like to add, and I totally agree with what she's saying, because we know from Islam that when Allah sends down the disease, He sends the cure.
Absolutely.
There's no such thing as something that cannot be cured except old age and death. So it's just that we don't know the cure yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we have to remember is that we are there to, you know, ask Allah. And some of these things are there to draw us back towards Him as well. And I think sometimes we don't tend to think of that. So it's always good to be reminded of these things, especially in these difficult times. I believe we've got Sister Roxana back on the line.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sister. Sorry, I think there was a little mishap on the phone.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened, but could I also ask, you know, you sisters and anyone that's listening and anyone that you know, to pray for my daughter. She's only 7. Her name is Jasmine, and Allah give her the strength to get through this, and inshallah we can all get through this test. Ameen.
Inshallah, I mean, we pray Allah to heal Jasmine, to give her the shifa, and to give you all sabr and jameel as well, because it must be an incredibly difficult time, especially with her being so young. So we hope that Allah listens to all of our du'as and that He gives her the shifa. Ameen. And just kind of looking at, you know, what parents and families are, you know, what encouragement they're given in participating in palliative care that their loved ones are given. I mean, what have you come to find out?
Families are very, very involved, and that's a very positive thing, because that tends to improve the communication, the morale and the effectiveness within the healthcare providers and the family. So everybody is, you know, aware of what the treatment is for that particular child and what that child needs. So family-centred negotiated care is paramount for, you know, a beneficial outcome for that child. Families are given respite from the hospices. And this is really something for that family, just to have a break. So throughout the year, they're allowed to have, you know, a certain amount of days, and they will leave their child within the care of the hospice, and then they will have a couple of days off, you know, just to recuperate and to recharge their batteries. And that's very much needed, I think, with families, because sometimes what can happen is that they begin to feel isolated, and they can sometimes feel, you know, it's such a big task and a mountain to climb with having a child who's got some sort of terminal illness. And also hospices offer you they do offer a counselling service to tackle that problem, so that if families are feeling a bit isolated, a bit alone, they can actually then go down and they have somebody to talk to within that hospice. So it's a very caring environment for the family and the child, should you choose to take that route.
I think it's really good that you mentioned the fact that they actually offer respite to the families, because I think a lot of the time when people think of caring for their loved ones, especially if they're caring for them at home, that they take everything upon themselves and they don't think to actually take some time out to rest from the situation. Because I think even when we're talking about family members, you know, they don't realise the amount of stress that they're going through, especially when they're having to deal with everything that's, you know, that comes along with looking after somebody who has an illness. So I think it's very, very important to stress that they need that time for themselves as well, and they shouldn't feel bad about that. And I think it's about having that balance as well. It's about having that renewed energy and having that renewed hope as well when you have that time out, to come back to it with fresh eyes and to kind of do things a little bit better. And even the fact that these services sometimes often help families in doing certain activities as well, you know, where they're including the child as well in something that they've always wanted to do and catering it to what those needs are. So if have always wanted to go to a certain place or to go to the zoo or anything like that, they actually help in making that happen. So I think it's very, very important to approach these networks and actually receive that help, because you're not alone, essentially. You know, there is the support out there. So we'll be coming back to carry on with this discussion, inshallah. This morning I am joined by Sister Maliha, Sister Maria and our special guest Zakia, who's with us over Skype. We've been talking about palliative care. Please do call in if you have something to share with us on this topic. The number is on your screens now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel #WAM15. And before we went to the break, Sister Maria, you were talking about the encouragement of the family to participate in the palliative care. Before we left, I know that you wanted to make another point there.
Yeah, there was just a final point about reading dua and the importance of faith for Muslims. It was not just Muslims but other believers of other faiths. And just referring to Sister Roxana, I'm sure she must have had some, you know, options for for hospice care and things things like that. But when you asked her the question, she came back and said that she just reads dua. And so that was a very critical point, because sometimes we're feeling quite hopeless, and you know, it's a coping mechanism that we do, and we turn to Allah and we ask for faith. We turn to our faith and we read dua, inshallah, to help us to get through.
And that's one of the things that we can do, because we know that Allah always says, you know, to draw close to Him, whatever it is that we're going through, whether it's something good or bad. But Zakia, when we look at what Islam has to say about suffering and seeking treatment, what can we find within the Quran and Sunnah that actually helps us in getting through this time?
I think it's a lot of what we talked about before with the dua, and also we know the Quran itself is shifa. Reciting the Quran is actually healing. Sister Roxana mentioned going to Umrah, and there's Zamzam water you can use, reciting Al-Fatiha, and also just taking care, using the practical means that the medical field has offered us and the worldly means that we know that are available. All of these things are covered in the Quran and Sunnah.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we tend to kind of drift away from sort of modern medicine, because we think that, you know, it's somehow isn't good or as effective enough. And I think one of the things that we forget when we talk about, you know, looking towards Allah and having tawakkul in Allah, having full trust in Allah, that Allah also tells us that while we tie a camel, we also need to look towards Him. And sometimes we forget about the tying the camel part comes hand in hand with having that tawakkul. So we have to put that effort in to seek out what there is, you know, for us to receive that treatment. Sister Maliha, I believe that you've got some other points to add to this.
When we talk about suffering, I mean, it's not just suffering, but everything good and bad, we know as Muslims comes from Allah. But when something bad does happen, it's an opportunity, as Zakia was saying as well, that we come close to Allah, we turn to Allah, we come towards Allah by obedience to Him and by remembering Him and turning to the Quran as a shifa, and all the various surahs which are there for shifa, and incorporating all of that into our life, and incorporating a certain attitude as well, you know, knowing and having yaqeen, certainty in the fact that, you know, when you have a hardship or any kind of distress, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, in the hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah says that if He wants to do good to anybody, He afflicts them with trials. And also we know as well that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no fatigue or distress or sorrow or sadness or hurt actually befalls a Muslim, even if it's the prick of a thorn, that some of his sins are removed from it. So also going through any kind of suffering is an atonement. Now, when we're talking about children, of course, children under the age of puberty are completely pure and innocent. They have no sin whatsoever. So therefore, you know, one may wonder, people do ask, of course, you know, then why should children be suffering? There's nothing that they have to atone for. But then that's when it becomes the test and the struggle of the parents who need to now it's their test, so they need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and realise that even though it's something very, very tragic and difficult in their life, this is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing out of malice. It's something that He actually wants to help you draw closer to them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us as well that every single child that dies, it's an absolutely agreed upon thing in the Mufassir of Quran, that every child that dies will enter Jannah. There's no doubt in that. Also, we know from Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam that he had a dream, which is also wahi, as we know in the case of the Prophet, where two angels took him to a very lush green garden, and in that garden there were other spring colours and beautiful flowers, in other words. And there was a very tall man, very, very tall, and he was surrounded by many, many children. That Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said he'd never seen so many children. And he asked the angels, you know, well, who is this man? And he said, this is Ibrahim alayhi salam, and these are the children who died in this world. So, you know, the children are Muslims and non-Muslims. So, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately testing parents, that you have trust in this, you have yaqeen, you trust in the next life, even though this life is difficult. Actually, you see that your child is escaping some of the trials of this life and the hardships and the grief and the heartache and the dangers, and all of those things are supposed to be, you know, the overall outlook that the Muslim parent adopts when their child is facing this kind of situation.
So what are the Islamic views and advice regarding palliative care, whether it's for the elderly or those approaching the end of their life? Are there examples of palliative care within Islamic history?
There are lots of examples of palliative care in Islamic history, but even just Islam, first of all, it would specify certain things. For example, modesty. A child over the age of puberty, even under puberty, because we do teach our children haya from a very, very young age, but But when it comes to palliative care and a carer maybe coming to the house, to not expose all of the body, you know, necessarily or unnecessarily, and obviously to keep the private parts private as much as possible when bathing or changing would be something that, you know, as Muslims we would really give consideration to. Also cleanliness, again, children over the age of puberty, but even at the age of 7, when they are asked to pray in Islam, we would want our children to obviously be always free from impurities, vomit and urine and things like that, so they can make wudu or ghusl when required and pray. And also actually the prayer itself, that's a part of the palliative care, to enable a sick person to pray is a very, very important thing, just like it is with the elderly, which I have some experience of. Sometimes it's the only thing that that person has, the only proper close connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if the illness is such that it's not enabling you to you know, focus on lots of different other areas of life and think about Allah in so many different ways. So the prayer is something that we can help people to do, and even our children.
Absolutely. I mean, Zakia, going on from what Sister Maliha has said in terms of the Islamic views and advice that we see when it comes to palliative care, what other examples can we see within Islam?
We know in Islam, especially when we believe someone is close to death, we try to get them to say La ilaha illallah. And another point that's really important, especially when we're dealing with palliative care, is to have them think positive of Allah, give them hope, always reinforce the idea of meeting Allah in a good way. You know, sometimes when you're sick and when you're stressed out and you're not feeling well, sometimes all of your sins and stress, and especially this is dealing with those who are above puberty, people may begin to despair. And it's very important, we know from Islamic history, and what we're taught is to keep the positive look of someone's soul and on Allah as we remind them. Obviously, we always are asking Allah to forgive us, but the emphasis has to be on the hope, and this is the sunnah.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things that we have to continuously remind ourselves that when Allah, you know, Allah tells us that I am as my servant sees me. So if we look at it as a mercy from Allah that we are going through this trial for whatever reason, then we will see it in a positive light. And I think sometimes we kind of dismiss, you know, positive thinking and the psychology behind positive thinking, you know, with having an impact on the way we deal with things. So I mean, Sister Maria, what other sort of approaches or examples can we find?
In terms of seeking treatment, which Zakia did touch upon, actually was from the Quran and prophetic du'as. And also the sunnah foods, really, so dates, olives, honey and black seed, all in conjunction with allopathic medicine, which is modern age medicine. And hopefully, inshallah, you know, with these things in mind, and having tawakkul, as you mentioned, inshallah, that, you know, even if it is a terminal illness, you know, hopefully with the palliative care, inshallah, you know, you can achieve some type of ease with that.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good point there, in that we have to actually look towards every avenue that's available to us. So whether that is spiritual, you know, praying more, making more dua, looking at the prophetic medicines, but also looking at what modern medicine has to offer, because I think sometimes we tend to veer away from certain things. We think that we should just stick to making dua, we should just stick to prophetic medicines, forgetting that actually having the modern medicine is part of the mercy from Allah, because Allah is the one who teaches us these things, who gives us the inspiration and the knowledge for all of these things. So it shouldn't be something that we dismiss so easily. But when we look at resources, and especially when we're talking about Islamic resources when it comes to palliative care, what is out there that we can go to and use that will give us not just you know, what we need in sort of modern terms, but also from the Islamic perspective? Sister Maliha.
Well, there are certain support groups. Muslim Disability Awareness is a Facebook group, and there's also Disabled Muslims, which is another Facebook group, and I believe they actually have a website that people can go to. They address disability, but obviously they address illness, chronic illness and terminal illness as well. And I think what they provide is a support network of giving reminders, you know, links to Islam, anything that will strengthen the Muslim or the family of a Muslim who is going through these kind of scenarios. I think it's, although there are always support groups within every illness, you know, the hospital will always direct you to a support group specific to that particular strain of medicine that's needed. what's always useful is if you don't have enough extended family or a large family or many, you know, or if you're perhaps a new Muslim and all your family members may not be Muslim, to at least go, and I think even I've seen it happen, if you just turn up as a sister at a circle or a halakha circle in any mosque in any town, you will find other Muslim women who are there to help you, and they will straight away reach out to you. I've seen it happen. People organise, you know, like a whole rota of food that they can deliver to your house. People will encourage you to hold on to Islam, remind you that, you know, this is happening to you as a test, this is not a punishment, enable you to be strong. It's not enough just to be told you're strong, you're strong. That's, sometimes people find that a little bit patronising because they might not be really feeling strong. What you need to give people is actually practical advice on how to cope, on how to get your head around this issue, which is a constantly evolving and changing issue. Some days are good, some days are bad, as we know with all illness, and some days you can be very positive and some days you feel awful. So you need a support network, and I think in the absence of one, it's really important to have one that will actually address your needs as a Muslim, because we think about life and death. It's very important to not just be in a support group where they're talking about stories and sharing experiences, devoid of the fact that there's reward in this, you know, the next life is coming, and, you know, children will be reunited with parents. That aspect has to happen, because as Muslims, that's what gives us strength. So, yeah.
And I think one thing that you touched upon is if you don't have that support from family members, where you live somewhere that's very far away from your family, or the fact that maybe you are a new Muslim and maybe relations with your family isn't that good, that, you know, sometimes we feel that, especially within the Muslim community, we find that people want to keep these things to themselves, because they think that if they were to go to someone to say, look, this is how I feel, I'm feeling very, very low at the moment, they feel that somehow that would, you know, reflect very negatively on them from the outside, and that people would judge them as having low iman. So they want to keep up appearances, and I think sometimes that can be very, very distressing in itself. And, you know, it's isolating as well to feel that you can't go out and talk to people within the community. So go out there and actually speak to someone, you know, make a friend out there, someone that you feel that you can trust and who will be there for you. Coming back to you, Zakia, what practical advice or tips can we give to anyone who is going through this particular situation?
The area that I'm most familiar with in terms of palliative care in giving advice is bibliotherapy, the treatment of basically the emotional and psychological symptoms through reading, and this is really helpful for people who don't have someone to talk to. And there's an actual organization that was recently established in the U.S. called Words Heal Incorporated, and they have an interactive website where you can go in and put in books and different specifically stories that other people have used to help them get through very difficult times. And I would say I strongly recommend reading, and sometimes you will find some actual mental health workers and physicians who actually recommend this to the patients, especially if they're able to, based on their illness. And audiobooks are also out there too.
Alhamdulillah, I think it's very important to actually go out there and do that research, because a lot of the times, you know, when we hear, you know, terrible news, such as, you know, a loved one, you know, falling ill and may not be able to recover from that, we go into sort of a denial. We don't want to know anymore. We don't want to research, and that kind of also holds us back from getting the help that we need. So, subhanAllah, going out to make that research and speaking to your doctors as well and asking them what is available to you in terms of not just supporting your child or whoever it is that you're looking after, but even for yourself as a family, because this is something that affects everybody within that family. So jazakumullah khair to you sisters for giving all of your tips and advice. The Islamic teachings encourage Muslims to seek treatment when they fall sick. For us, suffering is perceived as a way of gaining closeness to Allah, striving in the religion and acquiring traits of patience and endurance, and even atonement for one's sins. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, no fatigue, no disease, nor sorrow, nor sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even if it were the prick he receives from a thorn, but Allah expiates some of his sins for that. And this is from Sahih al-Bukhari. So it's again important to seek medical treatment, but also spiritual healing through the Quran and the Sunnah. It's been a really important discussion, but if you've missed any of today's show, you can catch a repeat tonight at 11 p.m, or you can catch up with the highlights from this week on Sunday at 3 p.m. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's show, but do join us again tomorrow, where we will be discussing dealing with infertility. And before we go, here's another reminder of this week's competition.